We're excited to host Kim. Kim is a best-selling author. She has written Radical Candor and very recently a new book called Radical Respect, which she'll be talking a little bit more about today. She's also deeply familiar with startups, having been a CEO coach for Dropbox, Qualtrics, Twitter, and other tech companies. She was also a member of the faculty at Apple University, and before that led multiple teams at Google on AdSense, YouTube, and DoubleClick. Without further ado, really excited to welcome Kim. Let's give her a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you. I'm thrilled to be here with you all. I think the other thing that you didn't mention is I also started several startups, most of which didn't work out. So I've been on the journey. You know, how many of you are familiar with Radical Candor a little bit? Yeah, so you know it's a book largely about feedback. And if you write a book about feedback, you're gonna get a lot of it. And indeed I did. And hands down the most valuable feedback is what prompted me to write this new book, Radical Respect. By the way, as I'm talking, if anybody has questions or wants to stop me, just feel free to stop me. It's not so. The more you talk, the better I sound. So stop me. So this happened when I was in San Francisco, not too far from here. I was giving a Radical Candor talk at a tech startup. And the CEO of that company had been a colleague of mine for the better part of a decade. She's a person I like and respect enormously, and she's one of too few black CEOs in tech, or frankly, in any other sector. And when I finished giving the Radical Candor talk, she pulled me aside and she said, Kim, I'm really excited to roll out Radical Candor. I think it's gonna help me build the kind of innovative culture I need, but I gotta tell you, it's much harder for me than for you to roll it out. And she went on to explain to me that as soon as she offered anyone even the most gentle, compassionate criticism, they would call her an angry black woman. And I knew this was true as soon as she said it. And I also knew how unfair it was because she's one of the most sort of compassionate, simple, you know, straightforward leaders I've ever worked with. And as soon as she said this to me, I had 4 different realizations at the same time. The first was that I had failed to be the kind of colleague that I imagined myself to be. I had failed even to notice the extent to which she had to show up unfailingly cheerful and pleasant at every meeting we were ever in together, even though she had what to be pissed off about, as we all do at work. But she was not allowed to show what she really felt. So I had failed her. I had failed to be sort of an upstander for her. Instead, I'd been sort of a silent bystander. I had failed to intervene. And that was not how I view myself. That's not who I wanted to be. But I had been sort of in denial about the kind of things that were happening to her. Now, the second thing that I realized was that not only had I been in denial about the kinds of things that happened to her, I had also been in denial about the kinds of things that happened to me. And kind of hard for the author of a book called Radical Candor to admit. But I had gone through so much of my career pretending that a whole host of disrespectful attitudes and behaviors were not happening that were in fact happening. So the second thing I realized was that, you know, I was pretending that I hadn't been harmed by these attitudes and behaviors when in fact I had been. So therefore I couldn't choose a response. And I think I did that because I never wanted to think of myself as a victim. But even less than wanting to think of myself as the victim did I ever want to think of myself as the culprit. So the third thing I realized was that I had been most deeply in denial about the times when I was the one whose disrespectful attitude or behavior had made it harder than it needed to be for the people around me to get their work done. So I could not do what I should have done, which was to acknowledge my mistake and make amends. And then the fourth thing that I realized was that I imagined myself to be the kind of leader who creates these bullshit-free zones where everybody can do the best work of their life and build the best relationships of their career. But I hadn't hadn't been the kind of leader that I wanted to be because I was pretending all this stuff was not happening that was in fact happening, so I couldn't prevent it from happening. So that was kind of a big drink of water. There was a lot of realizations all at the same time based on this feedback. But in a way, it was also very liberating because as I sat down to write this book, to start writing Radical Respect, I realized a whole bunch of things, and dragging denial around with you is no fun. Doesn't help you do better work. So before we start talking about what can go wrong, let's talk about what radical respect is. What is the kind of work environment that I think all of us want to create? You know me, I love a good 2x2, so I got to start with a 2x2 framework. So radical respect, and I call it radical respect because it's very rare. And by the way, respect has two different definitions. One definition of respect is this is something you have to earn. That's not what I'm talking about. The second definition of respect is more unconditional. It's the kind of regard that all of us owe each other. I owe it to each of you to have regard for who you are, where you come from, for your humanity. So that's the kind of respect that I'm talking about here. And this kind of radical respect happens in workplaces that optimize for collaboration rather than coercion, and that honor everyone's individuality rather than demanding conformity. And it seems sort of strange that this doesn't always happen, because I've worked with a lot of different kinds of leaders. I've never met a single leader who said, oh yes, I want to create a coercive work environment. Like, we know that we get the best kind of innovation, we get the best work out of people in a collaborative work environment. And I've also never met any leader who says, oh yeah, I want to start a company that insists on everybody marching in lockstep, kind of 1984 style. You know, we don't intend to demand conformity, and yet sometimes we do. So what is it? One of the things that can help us avoid mistakes is to give names to them. So there are times when we try to force people to respect each other. And then we wind up with what I call self-righteous shaming. And that might feel good in the moment, sort of moral grandstanding, but it is unproductive. It never results in the right solution. Sometimes we wind up in the worst place of all. That's what I call brutal ineffectiveness. That's Harvey Weinstein territory. Also, hopefully, not the most common thing. I think the mistake that a lot of us make all the time, though, is oblivious exclusion. There was one CEO who I was coaching, and he noticed that he didn't have any women on his team. And he said, to his credit, he said, I don't think it's probably the fault of the women at this company. It's probably the fault of my promotion process. So he invited me to come and sit in on his promotion process. And there were two people up for promotion, a man and a woman. And both of them had exceptional results and teams that really loved them. And they were talking about these two people, and one of them they referred to as a great leader. The man they referred to as a great leader, and the woman, they called her a real mother hen. I'm like, all right, guys, back the train up. I think words matter. Who are you going to promote? The great leader or the real mother hen? And they're like, oh, Kim, we didn't mean it. I said, I know you didn't mean it. You didn't intend to use words that are going to skew your decision, but it's what happened. We got to pay attention to it. So those are some examples of what can go wrong. Now let's double click here and say, get a little bit more specific about what gets in the way of radical respect, because there's a million things, but I'm going to boil it down to three: bias, prejudice, and bullying. And I think one of the issues here is that we often conflate these three things as though they are the same thing. But they're actually three different things. And if we conflate three problems as though they're the same problem, then we wind up feeling like this is a monolithic, insoluble problem. So let's break it down. I'm going to offer you some really simple definitions. Bias is what I think of as not meaning it. Unconscious bias is really what I'm talking about. But prejudice, on the other hand, is meaning it. Prejudice is a very consciously held belief, usually incorporating some kind of an unfair and inaccurate stereotype. And then there's a third thing that can happen, bullying. Bullying doesn't include any belief, conscious or unconscious. It's just being mean. And all three of these things are really going to screw up your culture. So what can you do about it in the moment when it happens? I think all too often, how many of you have been in a meeting recently where somebody said or did something and you're like, ooh, but nobody said anything? That ever happened? Yeah, all the time. So here's some thoughts about what to say when you don't know what to say. If you think what is happening is bias, start with the word I. Use an I statement. One of my favorite examples of this comes from a colleague of mine went into a meeting with two colleagues, and she had the expertise that was going to win her team the deal. And so she sat at the center of the table, and her two colleagues sat to her left. When the other side that they were negotiating with came in, the first person sat across from the guy to her left, the next guy sat across from the guy to his left, and then everybody else filed on down the table, leaving her dangling by herself. And that's often how bias shows up, just who makes some unconscious assumptions about who's who. She started talking, and when the other side had questions, they directed them at her two colleagues who were men. And it happened once, it happened twice, it happened a third time, and one of the guys stood up and he said, I think we should switch seats. That was all he had to do to totally change the dynamic in the room. And as soon as he said that, the other side realized what they were doing and they knocked it off. Why did he do it? 3 reasons. First is that he wanted to win the deal, and he knew that if they wouldn't listen to her, they wouldn't win the deal. The second is he realized it was more efficient. It was easier for him to say it than for her. Not because she couldn't stand up for herself, speak up for herself, but because it was going to be easier for the people who were making the mistake to hear it from him than from her. And then the third reason was sort of emotional. He liked her and he didn't like seeing her get ignored. So there's a lot of good reasons, some of them emotional, some of them very practical, to sort of disrupt bias in the moment. And an I statement sort of holds up a mirror to the other side, to the other person, and lets them know what's going wrong. It helps them self-correct the bias. However, if it's prejudice, holding up a mirror is not going to work. The other person's going to grin in that mirror. Yeah, they're going to like what they see. Aren't I good looking? And so it's not going to work. So what do you want to do if it's prejudice? If it's prejudice, you want an it statement. An it statement can appeal to the law, it can appeal to a company policy, or it can appeal to common sense. An it statement sort of draws a line and shows where the boundary between one person's freedom to believe whatever they want is, but they can't impose that belief on others. And it's important to make that clear. Example of this comes from my career. Shortly after I returned to work, after going on parental leave, I was chit-chatting with a guy before a meeting, and he said to me, oh, my wife doesn't work because it's better for the children. And for me at this moment, it was like a gut punch. But I didn't think he really meant it the way it sounded, so I used an I statement, assuming that it was bias. And I said, oh, I decided to show up at work today because I thought it'd be a good idea to neglect my children. And yeah, I was expecting him to have that response, to laugh and we'd, move on. But no, he was like, oh no, Kim, it is really not good for your kids that you are working. I'm going to give you this. So now I'm mad, bias is one thing, prejudice is harder to deal with. And so now I need an it statement. And so I started off by saying, it is an HR violation for you to tell me I'm neglecting my kids. And that had the desired impact. He jumped way back. I'm like, look, I'm not going to over-delegate to HR. I'm not going to make a thing of this with HR. But I think, and now I'm going to sort of appeal to common sense rather than the policy. I said, I think you and I can agree that it is my decision together with my partner how we raise our children, just as it is your decision together with your wife how you raise your children. He kind of nodded, but I can tell he wasn't really convinced. And I was like, and furthermore, I'm guessing you don't want to read my research any more than I want to read yours. And he was like, okay, you know. So I'm not saying that solved all the world's problems, but it allowed us to work together well, even though we had a different set of beliefs about how to raise kids. So that's an it statement. Now, if you're dealing with bullying, an it statement is not going to work because you know that the bully's first instinct is to kick past any kind of boundary. And so in the case of bullying, you want a you statement. You also don't want to use an I statement with someone who's bullying you. I learned this from my daughter when she was in 3rd grade. She was getting bullied on the playground, and I said to her, you know, tell this kid I feel sad when you blah, 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 blah. And she banged her fist on the table, and she said, Mom, they are trying to make me feel sad. Why would I tell them they succeeded? I'm like, that is a really good point, you know? And so we talked about a you statement. You can't talk to me like that. Or if that feels too confrontational, what's going on for you here? Why are you behaving this way? Or even just a you non sequitur, like, where'd you get that shirt? The point of a you statement or a you question is that you're now not in the submissive role. You're in an active role, and you're not taking whatever the other person is dishing out at you, but you're asking them to respond to what you're saying. So again, not going to solve all of the world's problems, but if you're in that moment where something happens and you want to say something, if you think it's bias, start with the word I, see what comes out of your mouth next. If you think it is prejudice, start with the word it, and something, you'll say something next. If you think it's bullying, start with the word you, and something will come out of your mouth next. Sometimes this is a momentum game, and it's all a matter of just kind of getting started. Now, it is pretty rare. Like, if we go back to the I think we should switch seats, that doesn't happen all of the time. Like, it's hard to be an upstander in the moment. And so I want to, and it's not always the most effective thing to do to stand up directly. So let's sort of double click on how can upstanders intervene. When you notice something happening, it's not happening to you, it's happening to someone else, you're not sure what to do. If you can't think of that, I think we should switch seats, or you don't think it's the right thing to do to intervene directly, you've got a bunch of other choices. Another thing you can do to be a good upstander is you can delay. And what I mean by that is you can check in with the person who was the target of the disrespectful attitude or behavior later. And this can make a huge difference to the person. I'll give you an example. I, one time, was giving a presentation to a big team, like 5,000 people. And I went on stage with 2 colleagues, and the guy who was introducing us introduced one of my colleagues, shook his hand, introduced my second colleague, shook his hand, introduced me, and I stuck my hand out for him to shake it. And instead of shaking my hand, he grabs it and he kisses it, like leaving some spit on the back, you know, disgusting, right? So that was like, that was unpleasant, not the end of the world. But what was even worse is that not a single one of those 5,000 people came up to me later and said, that was weird, you need some hand sanitizer or anything like that. And so then I'm starting to think, am I the only one who thought that was weird? You know, so easy to get sort of gaslit. And so checking in with someone later can actually have a big impact. Another thing you can do is create a distraction. There's a story in the New York Times about Snack Man where there was almost an assault on the subway and somebody just spilled his potato chips and that gave the person a chance again. So spill your coffee, you know. You never know what an impact that can have. You can also delegate. There's tons of research about the silent bystander. None of us want to be that silent bystander, both because we want to do the right thing for the person who's being hurt, but also for ourselves. I mean, how many of you have noticed something happening and you wake up at 3 a.m. later, like, why didn't I do something, you know? There's a moral injury to being a bystander. And so you wanna figure out what you can do. you can catch someone else's eye. Maybe you're not the best person to intervene, but don't allow the fact that there's usually more than one bystander. You can delegate the responsibility for intervening to someone else. And last but not least, we're all carrying these movie cameras around in our pockets with us. You can document what happened. But remember, if you document, you don't own that artifact, the person who was harmed. Like, don't document and then go post it on social media. Go check in, combine documentation and delay. Check in with the person and say, this happened, I have a documentation. What, if anything, would you like me to do with it? So those are a few thoughts on how to be an upstander. And a big part of why I wrote this book is in gratitude to the many upstanders I had in the course of my career. Upstanders make a huge difference. Leaders cannot solve this problem alone. It's really important to take on responsibility for being an upstander. Now, what I want to talk about next is probably the most uncomfortable for most of us situation. What if we are the person who said or did the disrespectful thing? And I write a whole chapter about this, and I write a lot about the different failures that I had in my career, because I thought when I started this software company, for example, and it was a long time ago now, in 1999. And I thought when I started that company, well, I have, if I'm in charge, everything's going to be great. I have good intentions, and none of this bullshit that was happening at these other places I worked will happen at my company. And one of the most disillusioning things about that experience was that all the same, but like, just because I was in charge did not mean that human nature changed, unfortunately. And the same is true for you all. I'm sure you all have great intentions, but when you are starting a company and leading a company and bringing together a group of people, it's not your intentions that matter. You actually need to get quite specific about how you're building out your culture, and not just your culture, your management systems. Because if you don't design them to be fair, you're going to wind up with systemic injustice every single time. It may not be your fault, but it is your problem. So what can you do when you realize that, and by the way, the more power you get in your career, the more likely it is that you're going to wind up in this role. Because power, absolute power corrupts absolutely. A little bit of power corrupts quite a lot. So how can you make sure that you don't wind up in the role of the culprit? Or what can you do if you do find yourself in that situation? I have another acronym, ACK. That's what I try to tell myself in these moments. And this stands for the way to respond, the things you need to do before you apologize and after you apologize. The first is that you want to be aware of what you did wrong and why it was a problem. It's not enough to say, I wasn't aware, or my intentions, I didn't mean to. Like, imagine if I came and I stepped on your toe accidentally, and you're like, you're stepping on my toe. And I was like, I didn't mean to, but I'm not getting off your toe. Like, what you're saying is, get off my damn toe. I don't really care about your intentions. So be aware. It's your responsibility to be aware. And once you're aware that you've made a mistake, you didn't mean to do it, but you still had a negative impact on someone, you want to acknowledge what you did wrong. It is so tempting in the moment to deny it. I don't know if have you all heard of DARVO? Deny, attack, reverse. There's a South Park. If you Google South Park DARVO, you'll see a very funny video about it, what it is. But it's instinctive for all of us when we realize that we've hurt someone else to deny it. And so teaching yourself to acknowledge it and to override that. And don't feel guilty, but that's not going to help. But teach yourself to acknowledge and also to accept the consequences. There may be some consequences. And I think one of the most painful things that I describe in Radical Respect is a situation where a group of leaders tried to avoid the consequences by hiring some bullshit investigator. And don't do that. And you may even want to make amends beyond what the consequences are. Now that you've done all those things, now you can apologize. But don't start by saying, I'm sorry you feel that way. Like that does not help. And last but not least, you need to try to change. So those are a few quick thoughts on what to do if you find yourself in the uncomfortable role of the person who caused harm.
What is the difference between make amends and apologize?
So making amends, let's say that I've done something wrong and sort of legally, if it's found that I did this thing, that I'd have to, let's say I fired someone unfairly, and so I need to pay them a year's severance or something. I may want to make amends that is even more generous than what I would be legally, the consequences. And then apologizing is saying I'm sorry. Does that make sense? All right. Other thoughts? All right. So let's now talk about what we can do to prevent disrespectful attitudes and behaviors from creeping into the teams that we start and sort of ruining our culture despite our best intentions. And again, your responsibility, you'll see that, there are different responsibilities depending on what your role is. And also, it's useful to be aware that sometimes we're in multiple roles at the same time. These bias, prejudice, and bullying are pretty much inevitable. They're going to happen, and it's your job as a leader to prevent them. Congratulations. Your job is to prevent the inevitable. That is why it's so much fun to be a leader. But you can even if you can't prevent it from happening, you can respond in a way that will prevent it from happening again. So in the case of bias, you want to disrupt it. You want to create a culture in which people will disrupt bias in the moment. Because we are, as human beings, we're pattern makers. And sometimes we make good patterns and sometimes we make bad patterns. And if we don't disrupt bias in the moment, in public, then we actually reinforce it. We ensure it's going to happen again and again, and then you've got an elephant sitting in your meeting. So you want to make sure that you're teaching people to have a shared vocabulary. What are we going to say or do? Is it, are we going to say, I don't think you meant that the way it sounded? Some teams say, ouch, and then it gives the person an opportunity to say, oops. I wave a purple flag on my team. But talk to your team so that everybody understands that there's a shared vocabulary. Here's what to say when you notice bias, because it's so tempting to ignore it. You also want to talk to people about what to do when you're the one whose bias is being disrupted. Because I don't know about you all, but for me, when someone tells me I've said or done something biased, I feel ashamed. I can tell you where I feel it in my body. I feel a tingling in the backs of my knees. It's the same physical sensation I get if my children walk too close to the edge of a precipice. And when I'm in that mindset, I'm sort of in shame brain, and my executive function is shut down. And so I need to learn how to turn it back on. Otherwise, I'm not going to respond very well. So thank you for pointing it out. Either I get it or I don't get it. It's hard to say thank you for pointing it out, I get it. It's even harder to say I don't get it, because now I'm doubly ashamed. I'm ashamed because I hurt someone else and I'm ignorant at the same time. But we are all in that situation probably multiple times a week. And just wait, I don't know if any of you have teenage children, but then you're going to be in that situation multiple times a day. So you want to make sure that you're teaching your team how to disrupt bias. In the case of prejudice, it's really easy for me to stand up here and say there's a line between one person's freedom to believe whatever they want, but not to impose those beliefs on others. Where that line is on your team is going to be different for each and every one of you. There's no sort of absolute answer to where that line ought to be. But what is important for you as leaders is to make it clear where that line is. And that means you need to create space to have a really uncomfortable conversation. And I recommend do sort of a pre-mortem. Imagine some terrible thing that happened at some other company has happened on your team, and ask yourself, how would you address it? And last but not least, bullying. It is essential for you as leaders to create consequences for bullying. You need to learn how to shut it down in the moment when you notice it happening in meetings. You need to make sure that you design management systems that do not give high ratings or bonuses to people who bully each other, like you need the Atlassian no brilliant jerks rule. When I was at Apple, people were rated on 3 different things: on innovation, on results, and on teamwork. And if you got a bad rating on teamwork, no matter how good your results were, you got a bad rating. It was not an average, that was your rating. And third, you want to make sure to create career consequences for people who bully others. All too often, a leader doesn't notice when one person is bullying their peers, and then they promote that person. And that is the moment when your culture begins to lose. You also, instead of promoting that person, you want to give that person some feedback, that that kind of behavior is not acceptable, and you need to let that person know that it will hurt their ability not only to grow in their career, but that if they don't change the behavior, they'll get fired. Because it is better to have a hole than an asshole. And with that, I will stop talking and start answering questions. And you can ask me about either radical candor or radical respect.
Do you recommend any interview questions?
Hang on, you got to talk into the microphone first.
Yeah, so suppose I'm hiring and I want to avoid people that will cause problems, just imposing their views on others. Do you recommend interview questions to ask to figure out that they might be, a problem person later on?
Yeah, I think that you're never going to hire anyone who will never cause any problems. You want to be you want to be all kinds of tolerant. So I think there's not like a political litmus test or anything like that. What you want to do is you want to check that people are okay working with other people who maybe disagree with them. So for example, I started a company with a guy who, he and I disagree on pretty much every political topic you could, but we did not have to agree about guns in order to write software together, And so I think that it is really important that the test as you talk to people and as you interview people is you're looking for a culture add, not culture fit. But the thing that you always want is to know that someone is okay hearing feedback, and that they are okay giving feedback, and that they understand that radical candor does not get measured at the speaker's mouth, but at the listener's ears. So they understand that being authentic does not mean ignoring the impact you're having on others, and that they really care about having a good impact on others. Does that make sense? I wish I could give you like a simpler answer, but I think it's important. You want to. I believe in diversity, and that means diverse opinions on a whole variety of things.
Somebody mentioned there are 3 types of people at work: drama others, the neutrals, and the drama sponges.
Yeah.
And you want to hire more drama sponges.
Yeah. And you as the leader also, or I call it the emotional shock absorber of your team. You don't want to be, the person who creates drama. You want to look for reasonable people. That's really what you want to look for. He had a question, and then you. Okay.
Hi, I have a question from when you don't have control. I was in my previous organization, I had a peer who had a team who was moved into my org, and he was a bully. And I knew he was a bully, and I told his manager that I didn't want this person there. But I ultimately didn't have control. And a lot of these other things like bias and prejudice, I felt like I could influence by modeling behavior or calling people out. But I can't create, or I didn't feel like I had effective tools to create consequences or to like change sort of the course of what was happening.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to someone who doesn't have direct control to respond to, or like ideally create bullying like to be an aversive thing that doesn't get reinforced?
Yeah. First of all, it's really hard to have a peer or who is bullying you. It's also hard. Sometimes I've had even employees who try I mean, that's a little easier if I'm their boss, but harder to create consequences if you're the peer. So you try the use statement. The use statement doesn't work, which it won't always work. What are your degrees of freedom next? And you've talked to your boss, and your boss is like, I don't see that as a problem. And so now you're kind of stuck with this person. I think, first of all, it's important to like be gentle with yourself. Like that kind of bullying at work can cause real impact. It can make it hard for you to do your best work, but it can be kind of traumatizing. And so the things that I recommend that you do are, first of all, document what is happening. Even if you're not going to use it, it's not like you're not going to use it for a lawsuit, but it's so easy to feel gaslit in that situation. Like, is it me or is it them? And so documenting and sharing that with someone you trust, not on your work computer, can be helpful. The next thing you want to do is you want to build solidarity. You want to look for other upstanders who might also be noticing what's going on and say, look, watch what's happening in this meeting, and if you can help me. And asking for help in that way that's not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. It's like asking for an investment in you. And so build solidarity. Next, you want to locate the exit nearest you. I think very often we feel trapped in a situation, and we're not actually as trapped. I mean, sometimes we are well and truly trapped, but often we're not as trapped as we feel. I remember I was in a really bad, one of my first work experiences, a terrible situation, and I had no idea that I could so easily have gotten another job until I went out and asked. So you want to figure out what your best alternative to a negotiated agreement is. And then you want to, so now you've done 3 things. You should always do those 3 things. The next thing you want to do is you want to go have what is going on with you? Like, what, we're not going to work together. This kind of behavior makes it impossible for us to work together. So talk to the person directly, again, but more forcefully, because now you have an out. And then go talk to your boss and say, I cannot work in this situation. Here's why. And maybe if you've built solidarity, go in with other people to say, here's what we are noticing. This person may be getting results here, but this person is hurting the ability of 5 or 6 other people to get their work done. So they're doing more harm than good. And help your boss notice that. And if your boss does not respond well, you can go to HR if it's a big enough company that there is such a thing. And HR will often be part of the problem. They'll sometimes be they'll often be part of the solution. They'll sometimes be part of the problem. But still reporting it is helpful. And if it's clear that you're not going to get a resolution, like, leave. Life is too short to work with people who treat you badly. I one time worked with someone who was so belittling that I literally shrank and I don't have half an inch to give. My doctor was like, do you really need this job? So take it seriously. These experiences are hard. Does that help a little? I wish there's a magic bullet. There's not. It's hard. And then.
I'm curious to ask, I think over the last couple of years, we've seen a backswing away from sort of like high levels of conscientiousness about about diversity and things like that. A lot of commenters that are on the more contrarian or right perspective might depict a lot of this as sort of like, I don't know, overly ooey gooey, or like, what's a good word for this? I'm not exactly.
Touchy-feely.
Touchy-feely.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe the concrete, specific part of that feedback is that there is a cost embedded with creating systems like this that is sometimes does not exist in organizations where there are sort of subconscious cultural norms that everyone's just built into, but everyone just knows.
Yeah.
And so in some ways it's sort of like this diversity, homogeneity trade-off, and the amount of energy that gets spent on coming up with communication norms that work for everyone.
Yeah.
And I'm curious on your own thoughts on that kind of trade-off and how that might vary over the course of a company's lifetime.
Yeah, there's a fair amount of research that shows that at first a homogeneous team moves faster because it's easier, but and not the super long term, but over the course of like a year and a half, you're beginning to get a better results from a more diverse team. And if I think we all kind of intuitively know this. If I think about the relationships that I formed in my career that were the most productive, and when I was doing the very best work, when a group of people was doing the very best work, it was often because we disagreed with each other and we saw the world differently, and it was out of those disagreements that the best work came. When Steve Jobs was talking about disagreement on a team, he compared it to a rock tumbler. And he said that when he was a kid, he went to his neighbor's house, and his neighbor said, go get some ordinary stones, like not the best stones in the world, but go get some ordinary stones. We're going to throw them into this tin can on a motor with some sand. And he turned the thing on, and there's a lot of noise, a lot of friction. He said, come back in 2 days, and let's see what happened. And 2 days later, out come these beautiful stones. And he likened that kind of debate and disagreement on a team to the rock tumbler. And that is how we do our best work, is we're working with people who understand things differently, who notice things that we wouldn't notice. That's what helps us do our best work. And it is important. And even, frankly, on a perfectly homogeneous team, you're still going to get bias, prejudice, and bullying. Like, everybody can, kind of gone to the same university, and they can be the same race and the same gender, but one person will have studied one thing and another person will have studied, and that becomes the source. So you can't homogenize away bias, prejudice, and bullying. These are instincts. We're going to find things to be biased about. We're going to find things to be prejudiced about. We're going to bully each other. And so no matter who is on your team, you're going to have to address these behaviors because they hurt a team's ability to collaborate. But yes, launching this book into this moment's like spitting into the wind. But that's all right. I'm not afraid to spit it. I'm not afraid to spit into the wind.
Sorry, my question was around bias, and I want to ask you, what kind of check do you do on yourself to determine whether you're having bias in a determinate moment, be it like a promotion, a hiring decision, a feedback, any sort of evaluation to, make sure that you're trying to be as unbiased as possible in that moment?
Yeah, it's really hard because if I'm unconscious of my own bias, like I can't sit there and become conscious. Like usually I need other people. So for example, when I was writing this book, I hired a bias buster, and I hired someone to read the book along with me and to point out things I was saying or doing that were biased. And she pointed out there were maybe like 8 phrases that I tended to use that were problematic. And my first instinct was, there's no word that's safe in the English language. I'm like, all right, there's 250,000 words in a language. 8 of them that I used were problematic. But the problem was that some of these things were new to me. So for example, I tend to say blind when I mean I didn't notice. Sloppy cite metaphors. And I care about this because I like to use precise language. I care, but also because one of the other people who was helping me to edit the book is blind. And so I thought that I got the feedback, I agreed with the feedback, I understood the feedback, I thought I was conscious. And right before I turned the book in, I did a search. And in a 300-page book, guess how many times I used sloppy cite metaphors, even after getting the feedback? 99. So these are deeply ingrained habits of thought and speech, and we need other people to point them out to us. We can also use tools like search, Textio will help flag biased language that you may be using in your writing. So asking, even if not in a situation where you're going to hire a bias buster, ask someone who you trust. Ask a couple of different people who you trust to point this stuff out to you. The more you make it easy for people to point out your biases to you, the more likely they are to actually do it, because it's uncomfortable. Does that help a little? All right, okay, go ahead.
My question is kind of similar to hers. I guess it's easy to see yourself as an upstander or a person who was harmed or even a leader, but you're kind of dependent on other people to point out when you're the person who's doing the harming.
Causing harm, yeah.
So what's a good way to be more aware of yourself in case that you might be that person?
Yeah. I think the first thing that is important is to kind of try to adopt a growth mindset towards learning about that, rather than a fixed mindset. So are you all familiar with that book, Mindset by Carol Dweck? Yeah, so it's one thing about a math problem to have a growth mindset. Oh, I got this problem wrong, I can learn something from it, how wonderful, isn't it exciting? Whereas a fixed mindset is, I got this problem wrong in math, so I'm bad at math. But I think when we're talking about bias, prejudice, and bullying, this comes with like almost a moral sense, and is way harder to have a growth mindset about who we are, who our character is, that comes tinged with some kind of moral thought. So beginning to have a growth mindset about these attitudes and behaviors, like, take some talking to yourself. I'll never forget a time I was giving a talk, and I said something, and someone pointed it out to me that what I had said was really quite offensive. And I remember, like, I went home and I crawled into a ball. Like, I acknowledged it at the time, but not as well as I should have. And I felt like awful. And beginning to accept that this was an important learning experience for me. So I reached out to the person who had told me, and I reached out to a couple of the other people who were in the audience. And we wound up, like, building a really good relationship. But it was hard for me not to want to just go home and crawl into a ball on the couch, And so the growth mindset is helpful. I think also what is helpful is, in Radical Candor, I talk about rewarding the candor when you get it. So when someone tells you that you've said or done something that was disrespectful, sort of making sure, that's why I talk about not only sort of accepting the consequences, but making amends, making sure that you reward that feedback richly. Because it's really hard for people to tell you that you've hurt them. It's hard for you to hear it, it's hard for them to tell you. But the more you can make it worth their while to tell you, the more likely they are to actually tell you. It's hard, though, is the answer. All right, if you're raising your hand, don't look at me, look at him, because he's in control of the microphones.
Thank you for this. I'm really interested in the relationship between rudeness and respect, and like how much overlap there is between those.
Yeah.
And thinking about startup environments in particular, where things are very fast-paced, and you might send a message, thinking about different modes of communication too, that is perceived as rude or maybe disrespectful, but isn't. And so if there's contexts in which that's acceptable, or if there's times when there's employees who consistently perceive something as disrespectful and rude when it's really just kind of concise, if you see there's any sort of acceptable context there, or if it's kind of a zero tolerance, like it always has to be kind of as caring or respectful as possible.
Yeah, so I think that it's really important to be fault tolerant, especially in a startup environment. It's got to be okay, but in no matter what environment you're in, it's got to be okay to screw up. Because if I'm so afraid of not offending you, then pretty soon what I'm going to say to you is nothing. And that is not really, that's not so helpful either. So I think also that there's a difference between rude and respectful. Like manners are, in my opinion, kind of problematic because what's rude in one culture is not rude in another. And also what's respectful. I mean, it's also context dependent. But I think the problem with manners is they tend to lead us to this sort of false harmony, which is that oblivious exclusion. So I think the difference between respectful and manners is that respectful is, I can disagree with you. I can be very clear about my about my disagreement, but I respect you. And you know, I can hold you accountable for doing something that hurt me or hurt someone else, but I still respect you. And so I think that is the difference in my mind. And it's got to be okay to get it wrong some of the time. I mean, even as I was writing Radical Candor, my editor would write, I err also on the side of being super brief. I'm really impatient, and my editor would write in the margins, hello, care personally, you know, so that was helpful, you know, so getting, and also remembering that being authentic doesn't mean ignoring the impact I'm having on other people. And so I'm going to try to be my most authentic self, and I'm going to try to be aware of the impact that my words or actions have on others. And I'm going to try to do better. I'm going to try to have a better impact, not a worse impact. Okay.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Jason. Thanks for the talk. I had a couple of thoughts. You know,
Great.
First of all, being in SPC here, we're all about building startups, and we're currently riding like the Gen AI wave.
Yeah.
And a lot of the things you're pointing out sounds like good intentions. And having my experience working at Amazon, one of the things we learned there is good intentions don't work. Mechanisms do.
Yes.
So I guess I'm wondering, is there, maybe this is a speculative question, is there something you see that perhaps Gen AI can be created as like a chat room moderator following a rule book, evaluating somebody, oh, so-and-so, and you know, we're collecting statistics and bam, reporting it to HR, or you know, as the Reddit meme goes, straight to jail. Thank you.
I prefer to use Gen AI to tell me than to tell someone else when I've made a mistake. So like one of the things that I was talking to the CEO of Otter AI, and Otter AI gives you a report of what percentage of time in a meeting that you talked. And this can be very useful if you look at it, because one form of bullying is what I call the bloviating bullshitter, the person who charges into a meeting and takes up all the airtime even though they don't necessarily know. Anybody ever noticed that bloviating? Yeah, it happens. And so I don't want to be a bloviating bullshitter, but I sometimes talk more than my fair share of the time. So Otter AI can give me a report at the end of the meeting. It would be really interesting if Zoom could halfway through the meeting say, Kim, pipe down, or Kim, speak up, like you're speaking too much or too little. I think it could also give me private messages, like, you keep referring, there's men and women in the meeting, and you keep referring to people as guys. But not everyone is a guy. Like, do you want to change it? Do you want to say you all? Easy for me to say, because I grew up in the South. You all may not fall trippingly off your tongue. But whatever it is. So yes, I think there's a ton of opportunity for AI to help us. But I would like it to help the person who's causing harm rather than to send people straight to jail, because it's going to get it wrong a lot of the time, and it should be ignored still a lot of the time. And so, you know, we can use it as a tool for self-improvement, I think, rather than, you know, Big Brother. Yes. you have the mic, so you get the question. I think you turned it off. There you go.
Perfect. Actually, as a side note, I make GPT reread my job descriptions to like spot like biases, and for what it is worth, it's actually like pretty useful among the million of use cases.
Yeah.
My question is, how do you spread some of those principles in your team? And let's say larger organizations, 1,000 people. I heard Lululemon trains all their people on Radical Candor. Awesome. You take a day, you make them read it, and they know it. And now on the other spectrum, the other extreme is N equal 2, which is like you and your co-founder. So you're on one or the other side of the table. You're either the bully or the one like receiving like the bullying. Now you take a company that is in the middle. I have a team, fairly small team, but still I'm not like in every single meeting. I'm not in every single conversation. And I know that there are stuff happening from a bias and prejudice perspective. Bullying, I think the thing comes up, like it bubbles up and I'm aware of it. But how do you go to like having everyone like embracing some of those like principles without like grabbing everyone like for a week and then making them read and learn by heart like Radical Candor?
A radical respect. And they can read it, and that doesn't mean they'll change their behavior, unfortunately. So like even a week-long training is not going to change your behavior totally. And when it comes to sort of bias, prejudice, and bullying, you know, bias is such a huge topic. I think one of the problems, for example, with unconscious bias training is that it's so abstract. And you know, sometimes people will write me and they'll say, well, you just give me a list of words that I cannot say, and it's not helpful. That's why I recommend a bias disruption. You want to think about sort of the systematic ways you can go about it, because what really matters with a group of people, with 5, 10 people in a meeting, even if there's like a meeting is usually not more than 20 people, are the biases that are relevant to the people in the room. So you don't have to know about every bias in the world, but if someone says something that someone else finds offensive, to learn how to say, hey, you know, I don't think you meant that the way it sounded, and to make it be lightweight and fast. The idea of bias disruption is it takes 10, 15, maybe at most 20 seconds. It's going to disrupt the bias without disrupting the meeting. In the case of prejudice, you know, you're probably going to have some policies that you put in place once you get to be over about, say, 150 people. You don't really need that many policies before then, I don't think. But stuff is going to happen on the team, so you want some sort of norms, like we're not going to wear gear T-shirts about who we're voting for example. I was in with a group of HR leaders, and they're like, oh, this presidential election is going to kill productivity for 3 months. So whatever it is but I would not recommend, you know, banning political speech at work. You saw what happened at base camp. So take a couple of use cases and talk to your team. Like, how are we gonna deal with that? And then if you're on, you know, if bullying is not a norm now, that's awesome. But I promise you, as you grow, it will happen. Because the problem with bullying is that it often works for the person who is the bully because people don't challenge it. People are reluctant to challenge it. But it does, again, it hurts 10 people. It helps the one person. It does more harm than good. And as a leader of the company, it's your job to make sure it doesn't happen.
I think we're at time, so.
All right, thank you all so much. Great.